And my name is Kason.
And my name is Bob. Shoot, I forgot my line. What am I supposed to say? Miss something.
You're walking?
Yeah. It's the it's the Mythwalker. That's it. I'm the Mythwalker. There we go. I got it right. Sorry,
he's not
sorry.
important. He's not important.
Don't mind me. Don't mind me.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, let's do it.
Yep.
No. I apologize. I'm sorry.
I have nothing prepared for this section.
A ridiculous week for me. I have not actually played any games this whole week.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh, people. Okay, I am really sorry. So okay, I should do a dark history on the production of this video because it's like plagued from beginning to end. I don't know if you guys got a notification. If you follow our channel, if you click the little bell next to the subscribe button, then sometimes you will, usually you should see a little notification up in your Google notifications every time that a video gets uploaded by us. So real quick, go ahead and do that. But here's the reason I'm even saying this. The video currently has about 4 views, I think. And a lot of people got the notification, clicked it, and saw that the video was blocked in their country. I apologize. So I still am trying to figure out exactly what happened. But long story short, One Punch Man, the owners of the copyright there did not like the fact that I included so much of their footage in my video. The video is about One Punch Man, so I'm going to rework it and see if I can get it to fit their little mold that they want it to fit. But I apologize. The video should have been out a few days ago. It wasn't. I uploaded it this morning. It didn't work out. The exports were all screwed up. It's just a plague project from beginning to end. But I should have something for you tomorrow or the day after, as long as I can work around this. If not, I made a sick video you guys might never see, and I'm really sorry. Maybe I'll put it up on Facebook or something, because I I really don't know what to do at this point. They don't want me to upload footage of One Punch Man. So I've got a few more things to try, and it's going to be a sweet video. You guys won't want to miss it. But so it'll at least be up on Facebook. If it's not up Wednesday or Thursday, then sometime Friday or Saturday, just check Facebook. I'll just put it there.
Okay, checking the comments here, it seems that there was an issue there with my mic, so no one was hearing what I was saying. So let me run through that.
The whole time?
One more time!
That's funny. I literally just got a text.
Did you guys hear me, though?
I literally just got a text about that, too.
Okay, so here's what it was. You didn't hear me, but you saw some footage playing.
Oh my gosh.
I suppose I could play it again.
Oh, dear.
It's one of those things that happens. The episode...
It doesn't happen very often.
Well, it happens all the time, actually, because I stream it like every day. But what'll happen is that when I'm recording footage, I'll disable the mic in OBS.
Right.
But then I forget to turn it on again.
Yeah.
When exactly over the top of my footage, right? So then when I go to stream, I'll forget to turn the mic back on. Now here,
right.
I turn them off on purpose during the intro music, but then I click them and turn them on. I just missed clicking my particular mic feed. So, happens. Here, we'll do this again. Not a problem. We have a small milestone this week. This episode is brought to you by Swanwick. Swanwick is a company that creates these glasses right here. They block blue light. So for those of you who have eye fatigue, you're staring at your screen all day. There's a pretty big difference. I take these on and put them off. It blocks blue light, which can help people who have trouble sleeping because they're staring at cell phone screens and computer screens and stuff like that all day. So there's a link in the description where you can go and check out the product if you'd like to do that. And the footage that I was playing earlier in the podcast was an unboxing of it, so you can see like what you can expect from the product when you open it up. Again, the Amazon link is in the description. And I mean, they make a pretty big difference. I mean, you can see like the orange tint in the lenses, but like it could really help for people who struggle with that. So anyways, Swanwick, and the product is called Swannies glasses. And they're dope. Check them out. Okay. Thank you for letting me do that a second time and get it right.
Great. And it sounds like everybody was able to hear me, just not Mike.
That is the important part. So
yeah, you and Lorerunner were fine. It was just me.
Sure.
Okay, we want to talk about Dragon Quest XI. Like I was saying in the beginning when you probably couldn't hear me, Lorerunner's been streaming this for pretty much the entire week, right? Or at least a number of times.
Every day since last Thursday, yeah.
And it's a long game, but you've gotten pretty far into it.
I'm in this, what I would call the second half of the game. I haven't hit the post game yet, though.
Okay. So, what are your thoughts on the game so far? I've only played a couple of hours, and I have some thoughts on it, but you'll probably have the most insight.
I've actually been thinking about how to summarize my thoughts as much as possible, because anybody who knows me knows I'll talk for way too long. But in summary, the gameplay is excellent. I would actually call this the best gameplay Dragon Quest game I've ever played. They do a lot of things very smartly, very tightly. And, if I could just say one thing about this game that I could praise more than anything else, I have yet to stop and level.
Oh, really?
And
so you haven't done any level grinding?
No. Now,
which is rare for a DQ game.
I have had some issues. I'm not going to lie. And there has been a few times where it's like, "Urgh!" And I had to fight that one boss, which I'm not going to name out loud because I'm not spoiling anything 3 times. But I have managed it. And the fact that the game is designed tightly enough that difficulty curve is appropriate to where I am without having to force me to go and stop grinding, that's awesome. And I love that. I
think that might be one of the advantages to the action RPG system over a traditional RPG system that's turn-based.
This is a turn-based RPG.
Are you serious?
Yes.
For some reason I thought it wasn't. I thought
no.
Oh no, it's not random encounters. That's
what you meant.
No
you meant random encounters. Yeah.
That's what I meant. I didn't mean turn-based, but a typical random encounter RPG where it's just.
They for just a second, but you're good. They took out the random encounters in the 3DS release, I think it was, of Dragon Quest VIII, which was really nice. I really liked that, and this kind of carries that as well, where you can, sneak up on them. At first, I remember when I was first playing, I was going through the first dungeon, they first introduced the idea that you can smack them and get like a preemptive strike or whatever. I was trying to be like super careful and like sneak around him out of his line of sight. But no, you don't have to do that. You just run straight up to him and just smash the button, and then just, as soon as you're in range, you'll smack him. So I learned that pretty quick and stopped looking stupid as I was like trying to sneak around enemies and stuff. But I really like the game so far. The way that they have sort of realized the visual aesthetic here, the blend of the Toriyama like anime style with like some really nice texture work, and really great like lighting systems and shaders and stuff like that. Like, it kind of like hits that blend between like having some modern realism in like high level graphics and everything like that, but at the same time is really true to the style of Dragon Quest, and it's just blended so seamlessly. It's just absolutely beautiful. I really, really love that. And the one complaint I have had with Dragon Quest for a little bit, well, not so much with 8, because 8, at least the PlayStation 2 version, had that orchestrated soundtrack that we got over here.
Yeah.
And did not have it in Japan, which also didn't carry over to the 3DS version. But it's like the abrasive might be the word I'm looking for. The velocity, like it there's something about the way that the music is structured that just feels so sharp and harsh. And it just bugs me that they can't, produce a more natural sounding orchestral soundtrack in a 2018 Dragon Quest game. I don't know.
Well, it's funny you say that, because one of the recurring themes in my own stream has been how much we're making fun of the soundtrack, especially since some of the music, like you'll go into this town and anybody who knows Dragon Quest, it's dark, right?
Yeah.
Horrible, dark, death, doom.
I know, the music is...
Yeah, the whole time. But at least it's better than Mitsuda. That's okay.
We'll get into that.
We'll get to that.
Sorry.
It's a stylistic choice because it's so consistent, as everything in Dragon Quest has been. Like, the music has always been that way. Mm-hmm. And, I love... Well, they changed it. The little jingle that plays on the... not the title screen, but the screen where you're about to start a new quest, which usually was dun 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 dun. Like they have like it's a different melody, but it's done in a similar style. I was like, oh man, like I missed that song. But for the most part, Dragon Quest music does feel very like harsh and sharp. And like the first thing I did as soon as I could was turn the music volume down in the game, because it's abrasive. It's just really like ugh. And I think a lot of that could be the fact that for whatever reason, they're not like, I know that's Square Enix. I know they have the freaking sound fonts in the libraries and the instruments to make something that sounds as real as an actual orchestra, but they just didn't use it here, or they're not editing their velocity on the notes. I don't know. Yeah. Like what it is, but it's just, that's the one thing I'm not a super huge fan of in this game. But
it's worth noting really quick for anybody who cares, like Mike, they're actually already fans are already working on a mod to go ahead and add back in the symphonic soundtrack into the game, so you'd actually hear the proper symphonic version of music.
Nice.
Which I'm told is a lot better, and they will never do officially for legal reasons we're not going to get into.
Wait a minute. Okay. So you're saying add back in? Was it not the same way in Japan, or did they have a symphonic soundtrack in Japan? Or?
There is a symphonic soundtrack. I don't actually know if it's on the Japanese version myself, but from my understanding, it isn't. Because
Jairus made a comment here saying the music is there, but the composer is not cool about it.
Yes, that is correct. That is a slightly... It's actually kind of a convoluted situation. Apparently, the way the composer, and I can't remember his name, please forgive me, the way he does things is he likes to make sure that every single member of his orchestra gets a share of the take, and that includes legally, which means if they were to actually put out the symphonic soundtrack, every single member of his orchestra
and
would have
sold
to have
it overseas.
Yeah. You see how this would cavalcade.
Yeah, that compounds. Yeah.
So hopefully we'll get that fan patch going so that us here over outside of Japan can actually have the proper music instead of this MIDI stuff.
Yeah, that would be really nice because I don't know, like with how beautiful the game looks and everything, it just felt like, I don't know, it just kind of feels out of place, and it would be really nice to have something.
Oh, I agree. And as an aside, Morrowind music works really well with it. Speaking from
Oh, really? Were you
I've
doing that
done
in
the
your
Morrowind
stream?
test. I've done the Morrowind test. It
Nice.
works great. It really does. Like it looks gorgeous, and there's you got the da 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 da.
That's awesome. Anyways, I haven't gotten super far though. I got through the first village. We got a super chat here from Jakobine. Thank you so much. I guess my invitation to be on the podcast got lost in the mail. But we'll have you on. We'll have you on, man. Anytime.
That's probably what happened, Jakob.
It probably, it got lost in the mail. That's what happened.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. No, but I got through the first village. Kind of exploring the map a little bit. Got into Heliodor, I think is the name of that first city.
That's right.
That blew me away. Like the way that city is sort of constructed, the scale of it, it felt really impressive for, I guess, typically what you see in JRPGs. I don't know. I'm really enjoying my time with it. Like I said, I'm not like the biggest Dragon Quest fan in the world, but it's released infrequently enough, especially here, that like every time a new one comes out, it's kind of like, oh yeah, like I'll get back into that and do that again, even though like, the level progression system's almost always exactly the same. Combat's almost always exactly the same. The stories are they are what they are. The music's always the same. But it's its consistency that I actually respect a lot about it, especially within the same organization that, I mean, it's two different completely different philosophies. And Final Fantasy was started with that in mind, that we're going to try and change it up and evolve and do something new and different every time. And so that is what it is. And you're going to upset people who think it's Final Fantasy disease, right? Some people think it should be this. Some people think it should be this. And which one is their favorite? They think it should be like that. And that's just the nature of the series. But Dragon Quest, Yuji Horii is very different. He's all about like sticking with what works. And it's nice to play a game on this era, where to me, like I guess like at the heart of what I took away from my time with it so far was that this felt like playing an NES or even an SNES RPG, but just like brought into the modern day and dropped in with like modern graphics and on a modern system. But it just feels exactly like it felt to play those old school RPGs, and that's a nice feeling to get. So I respect it a lot for that reason, but who knows when I'm going to finish it, because holy crap, is that a long game.
I've been playing it for like 70 to 80 hours.
Oh, at least, yeah. What did you say, Lorerunner?
Oh, I was just saying I've already been playing it for 6 days. I'm up to like 40 hours on my save so far. I am not yet through the first chunk of the game.
Wow.
It's a long one. It's a long one. You got to be in for the long haul with that. And so that's kind of how I'm approaching it. It's like I'll casually here and there just kind of like be along for the journey. It's probably going to take me a year to beat it, but it is what it is. It'll happen when it happens. Okay, those were our thoughts on Dragon Quest XI. Now it's time to move into the real meat. We had our warm-up session. Now it's time to...
the jam session?
Yeah, now it's time to get into it.
All right.
You guys had some really big questions and topics for us this week. We're going to start with Dude McGuy.
Yes. How do we want to tackle this, by the way?
Okay.
There are many questions within the question.
Yes. Here's how we're going to do it. I'm just gonna bust through the whole thing. I'm just gonna read it all out.
All right.
And as much as we can remember to respond to, we don't have. I think that just tackle the topic as well as you can.
Okay.
But okay. So here's the question. From what I understand, there are 4 core elements or concepts of a good story: characters, plot, setting, and themes. Before I continue on, Lorerunner, do you want to explain on your Lorium you have what's called the 6
I do.
concepts?
I have the 6 points of story. I like to use my hand to demonstrate. I don't know if I'm on screen right now.
Yeah, you are.
Feed there is really delayed. Characterization, character development, thematic significance, setting. I missed one. Plot. God, this the least
plot.
important one of all.
Plot, the least important.
And fun.
Yeah.
And all 6 of these points are, in my opinion, what make up what I usually refer to as story. Just brief description, characterization is the fleshing out of a character as they are now and as they have been. Character arc, character development, that's obviously where they're moving, where they're going, how they're changing. Themes, that's obvious. I don't really need to explain that. Setting is all about world building, fleshing out the world, the lore, the history, the way the setting works, the way magic works, or technology works, or whatever. Plot is the specific main events of the story, obvious. And of course, fun is kind of the hard one to quantify. But fun is all about whether or not it is enjoyable to digest the work, because there are plenty of work, and I've talked about this before, there are plenty of works that have all 5 points but aren't really that fun to enjoy. And there's ones that aren't really strong in some of these points but have a very fun story. So all 6 of these points together make up what I call the overall structure of story.
Okay, cool.
How about that?
So,
Nice.
I think I have a question for you, at least the one that came from the audience elsewhere, about like why you tend to split characterization from the other, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Okay.
First of all, let me know if there is something I missed. Okay, I'll skip past that part. I know there are different techniques for conveying these, like writing, acting, pacing, point of view, narration, but I think there are basic 4 things that usually are trying to be conveyed by the creator. So question 1, how do you personally prioritize these elements from most to least important when it comes to experiencing a good story? Or which of the 4 elements do you prefer the story to focus on the most? 2, does your answer to question 1 change based on the story's genre? If so, why do you think that is? Question number 3, which of these 4 elements, if done exceptionally well, can make an otherwise average story feel memorable or special to you? Question 4, which of these elements will run or drag down the whole experience the most if done poorly? And finally, do you think the answers to the above can be used as a good way to determine if someone would generally prefer Western RPGs versus Japanese RPGs? Okay, so those are the questions. Handle them as you see fit. Let's Kaysen, you want to go first on this one?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So, when you look at, let's just start with question 1. How do I prioritize these elements from most to least important? And the answer is I don't. One of the most difficult things to do when analyzing a story is well, when you're critiquing it, you're trying to say, oh, they did this wrong, they should have done this. But there are always counterexamples of movies or books or plays or any type of media that did something that way, but it worked, whereas these people, it maybe didn't work as well. And a lot of that comes down to execution. But when you split apart like the 4 different ones, I can't say that any one is necessarily more important to than the others, other than possibly setting maybe is like the lesser-ish important, because there are certain stories that I have kind of read or become involved with that don't really give you much of a setting. And sure, it's a trip, but you can still have characters, a plot, and a theme, like a reason for it, without necessarily. But you can't really tell a story without characters, and a story isn't a story without a plot. And without a theme, the story doesn't mean anything. But the setting is just, it's like pretext. So you got your theme is your subtext. It's like, what are you supposed to get out of this? The setting is your pretext, and then the characters and plot would be like the actual text, right? The literal what it says. And there are certain movies like the Harry Potter series focus more on characters. The Lord of the Rings focuses more on setting. Like when you look at the Lord of the Rings as a whole, you've got characters were like good, but not amazing. Plot is good, but not amazing. Setting, holy crap, that is literally where all of Tolkien's time
off
went.
the chain.
Even a story almost entirely based on setting. How, like, that's mind-blowing, right? Because you'd think that's like possibly like what I just said, maybe the one you can kind of gloss over the most, or maybe you just dedicate a paragraph or 2 at the beginning and just move on with your story. But Tolkien was able to make an entire thing based on mostly setting and, of course, themes, because what are you going to do? I think theme historically has been, like, I'm talking 10,000 years ago, theme has been the most important aspect of a story, because when stories were being shared, what am I supposed to get out of it? How do I apply it into my personal life? That's kind of, in some sense, that's kind of the point of stories. That's kind of why humans evolved, like telling stories, or, beware of this. Oh, there was once a man who went and did this, and what you're supposed to take out of it is, hey, don't do that, or hey, do that and your life will be better. But either way, the theme is really like the human element of a story, and that's what enables us to kind of absorb it. So theme is super important. I'm trying to think, if you guys will have to maybe come up with an example if you can, but a film that does not have strong thematic elements, but that is still like really good,
Predator.
Generally speaking.
Predator.
Sure. So using your
Good
five,
answer.
you can pick the fun, right? It's like, okay, for everything else, it's
film.
fun.
It is a legitimately fun film.
No,
Sure.
absolutely.
And it has
so
no
when it comes,
themes at all.
I've never seen Predator, to be honest, so that's unfortunate. I can't really participate in that discussion. But in terms of like which one's more important, it's really hard to say. But when you talk about does it change based on a story's genre, I think it just changed based on stories in general. Like any story can work focusing on just one of these four things, or as Lorerunner mentioned, one of the five things. You can have like Team America World Police. That's probably the most fun, but not any of the other things movie that has ever been made. And it is a good movie. It's just hard to explain why it's a good movie. It's a joke. The whole thing's a joke. They're treating it as a joke, but somehow that's why it's so good. So they executed it perfectly. But what did they execute? Like a bad story? They executed a bad story perfectly. It's really weird. So anyways, when I look at the rest of these questions, I see just like theme. Question 3, which of these, if done exceptionally, will make an average story feel memorable or special to you? That's theme right there. Your thematic elements. That is what enables humans to connect to it the most. So there you go on that one. I'm just going to kind of like machine gun these. But which of these 4 elements will drag down a whole experiment or a whole experience if done poorly? Now, that's a big deal, but I would still say theme. You know what? Maybe it is the most important. Because if your movie doesn't have a theme, what is the point? What is the point? And how is it going to be memorable? How is it going to be special? Explosions are fun and cool. And dang it, the video I had just made that everyone would have watched, were it allowed to be on YouTube, explains literally this whole thing, because I use One Punch Man as an example of how bad storytelling methods can be good if done the right way. And so, but I think really important, even within One Punch Man, is the theme. It's just the way that this character became who he is. It's through hard work, and maybe if you work hard, you won't be quite as strong as him, but your life will get better, and the thematic elements that you can internalize are definitely there.
Yeah, especially the internal conflict for the character, right? Being bored,
yes.
Like having achieved what he thought he wanted, but then he's there and there's no challenge in life. And
so I equate that. Specifically, I just give away my whole video, but I don't care because I don't know. Anyways,
you should watch
I equate that to finishing an RPG, any JRPG, basically all of them. And at the end of the game, where you're basically like, you have godlike power, like you are challenged by nothing. You will you can overcome any and all challenges with little difficulty because you are that powerful, especially compared to how you were at the beginning of the game. You are basically a god by the end of like many JRPGs. And that's kind of where One Punch Man starts. Here's a guy who has beaten the game, so to speak, the game of life. He's done. He's more powerful than he could ever be, and he's bored of it. The same way you kind of get bored at the end of JRPGs because you're just like, this isn't hard anymore. You're ready to just kind of be done with it. And imagine beating the boss, but still living. I'm not talking about Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. I'm talking about Final Fantasy VII Cloud at the end of that game, just going back and doing normal things. He's loaded with materia. He is loaded. He is a god. He can create planets if he wanted to. Like, it's just like, anyways, kind of funny stuff. In terms of the final part of this question, though, about whether it draws people more towards Western RPGs or Japanese RPGs, I'm going to leave that one to you guys for the most part, because I don't know exactly how to answer that, because any any like mix and match of characters, plot, setting, themes can work. It's just it needs to be done right, and that's what it all comes down to. So in terms of which genre does that better, or which Western versus Japanese, like I don't know, there are examples all over the place of people who just focused on one thing, did it really well, and people loved it.
All right, Lorerunner, how about you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I really like Chocolate Rob's idea. We should act out your video live. Screw the copy wrong. Let's just do it right here.
I don't think
Make
we
it happen.
can.
You narrate it, and Laura and I will act out all the scenes.
Yep.
Okay.
I got this. I'm ready. No. Okay. So, funnily enough, I have the same answer as you, but different, because I think the same thing applies to all of the gentleman's questions equally, and that is characters. For me, it is all about the characters. Now, that is admittedly a little bit of a preference thing as well. But one of the things that really draws me to stories is whether or not your people are multidimensional and whether or not they are interesting. And these two things may not coincide. We have had interesting one-dimensional characters, and we have had boring multidimensional characters across the course of fiction. I can name examples, but I don't feel like it. Well, okay, Aragorn. Let's go back to Lord of the Rings. Aragorn is extremely monodimensional. There's nothing to him, right?
Yeah.
Right? But he's still interesting, right? People still find Aragorn to be an engaging character. So it's not like you have to have depth to him. But anyways, I'm getting slightly off topic. The point being...
it's going to be easy in this question to get off topic.
It is going to be extremely easy. I'm going to try and stay as focused as I can here. You guys know how horrible I am. Characters. I live, eat, breathe, and drink characters. It's kind of gross that gore comes out sometimes. I get stuck in my beard. And I love the way that a good story will show us how much someone is impacted, or how much they care, or how much they feel, or what this means to them, or what it doesn't mean to them. It's in my opinion, one of the reasons that some of the most engaging and memorable characters across fiction in all mediums are the villains. Excuse me. Like, I guarantee you, if we were to name a random movie or a random game, among the first characters that would come to mind would be the main villains. And the main reason for that is because those villains get the most time. They actually get the most characterization, and they often get the most character development as well. Oh, I suppose, should we answer that other question? Why those two are split up? You want me to answer?
Oh yeah. Let's do that real quick. So you split character into two different categories, and so some people were interested as to why you do that instead of lumping them into one.
It's a really boring reason, I'll admit it, but it's because I've seen so many works of fiction where there's a character that has plenty of characterization that never moves, that never changes, that never does anything. Basically, everything in Borderlands is actually a pretty good example of that, just to name a weird example. And then you have characters who have no characterization at all until their character starts moving and starts doing and changing and developing. And I've always felt that the two are completely different styles of writing, because characterization is developing basically their personality, right? And establishing their moods and their preferences and their thoughts and their hopes and their dreams and everything about them. But character arc is all about how they react to things, how they change, if they change, and why they change. And I've always felt that requires a different type of writing, and therefore should be qualified as something differently when we're analyzing it. That's just my opinion.
Oh, I like that.
Well, I think that's pretty good, because that kind of parallels the separation between plot and setting to some degree. It's just the character's setting is the characterization, whereas the plot arc and development is the character.
Really good point, actually. Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. Makes sense.
No, I agree. I
anyways,
I should answer the last part here really quick.
Yeah,
JRPGs or Western RPGs? I got to be honest. If you were to just say, all right, which of those has the better characterization, it would be JRPGs. JRPGs focus so much more on characterization because Western RPGs tend to be focused more on you picking your characterization through role-playing, basically.
Yeah.
Think of Dragon Age, think of Oblivion, think of Baldur's Gate, That being said, though, I do think that where your focus is, which of the 6 points of story really matters to you. Forgive me for saying 6 instead of 4. Whichever the 4 points of story that matter most to you. I use 6.
It makes sense. It makes sense that characters is your most favorite because characters is actually 2 for you. So you're cheating.
It is. I'm cheating. I'm getting all as much as I can.
It's so important. You had to split it up. It's ruined the whole thing.
cake and eating it too. But no, in all sincerity, I think that that's going to change what kind of stories you prefer. Because I've noticed a lot of JRPG stories, again, very character focused, but not quite as focused in elements of, for example, plot. Like, I know that sounds strange, but let's use the Final Fantasy series. How many Final Fantasy series have had a very strong plot, main plot focus? I can name one off the top of my head.
Strong plot focus, mainline Final Fantasy.
Specifically plot.
So not characters only.
Not characters, not characterization, not character development. Because, like, for example, FF6 is really big on character arcs. That's probably the biggest.
Yeah,
I would say
25.
I would say a lot of the early ones, say like Final Fantasy 3 or 5. But I mean, they're so basic that I don't know. It's kind of hard to say.
My personal example is Tactics. I think Final Fantasy Tactics has a very strong plot focus. It's one of the only ones.
That's true.
It's kind of an outlier, but it's there. But that's exactly my point. A lot of JRPGs don't really focus on the plot all that much. You've got your weird, and you've got your excessively convoluted, and then you've got the characters, and you've got the setting, which usually takes the bulk of the focus of events, of the focus of what they develop, what I call screen time to, how much you actually get invested through the course of playing the game into them. By contrast, Western RPGs tend to be a lot more about more regional stuff, and thus tend to be a little bit more focused on setting. I know several people personally who actually got into Forgotten Realms and Faerun in general as a consequence of getting into Neverwinter Nights, for example, or really wanting to delve into God, I suddenly can't think of D&D Online, DDO, which got them into Eberron. You know, it was like, oh my God, there's so much, and why does this work this way? And what's that magic thing that's going on over there? You know, there was a lot of background development. Even the Elder Scrolls games do this, despite the fact that they're... well, anybody who watched my lore run on that will know my problems with the lore of Elder Scrolls. I'm just going to not get into that tangent right now. But you get my point. I do think that's going to change something of your preference and your focus.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like, it's, as you're alluding to, a lot of it is really going to depend on what you prioritize, what you like. So a lot of people that I know, they prioritize number 6 in your scale, or is fun, right? Like, I know a lot of people who, like, the only thing they really care about is, did I have a good time? Was I entertained? And that's really all that matters to them. And, you know, that's a completely legitimate way of, taking in or consuming whatever media you're choosing. For me personally, I'm also very much a character person. I think that, like, theme is probably a close second. But, I did a Chrono Cross review a couple weeks ago, and I think I fumbled what I meant to say a little bit in a section where I was talking about how the central theme is not super clear throughout the game, and that I felt like the text in the final moments of the game sort of felt like it comes out of left field, like we're talking about this thing as if it was like the main point or the main theme of the game, but I didn't really feel like that was true as I had played through it. And so for me, I was kind of like, when I was doing my research, I read an interview with the director who was saying, I don't really think much about theme at the start of a project. I kind of just, we're more focused on whether maybe the fun aspect, making sure the game is enjoyable and that sort of thing. And I mentioned that, but I got a really good counter argument in the comments, bringing up a lot of esteemed authors, Stephen King among many others, who say very similar things when they talk about theme. They say, I leave the theme to the interpretation of the reader, and I'm just focused on writing a good story. I don't entirely agree with that, personally.
I don't either.
I'm not saying that that's a wrong way to do it either, by saying I disagree. Whatever works for you, and Stephen King has obviously found something that works for him, a process, and has been very successful and wrote a lot of great stories. But I tend to put more emphasis on theme driving, like, why you are showing what you're showing from scene to scene. Why did we move here? Why are we seeing these characters talk about this thing? What is the purpose of any of it? And is it leading into our climax? Is it giving us the context that is necessary to deliver the emotional impact at the moment of climax. So to me, that's kind of like my way of thinking about it. Like that helps guide the decisions you make and what you should cut and what you should include and what you really need to put in there. But it is definitely also a legitimate point that many great authors don't think about theme, and that theme is often interpretive anyways, because you can have two different people seeing the same thing and come away with a different message, something that resonated with them, and they could be totally different from each other. So for that reason, I would put theme probably behind characters, because to me, what's happening in the plot, the events that are going on, is totally irrelevant if I don't care, if I'm not invested in the people who are going through that. If it doesn't matter to me whether they succeed or fail, then you could have a great setting and a great plot and really interesting ideas, but ultimately, like, I'm not really like attached to the people there. So it's kind of like, oh, this is cool. There's not like an immersion into the plights of the characters. So I tend to prioritize that. And then theme is something that I also put really high up there. So I'd probably put theme as a second, and then plot setting would probably come after that. But let's see. Does it change based on the story genre? Yes and no. Kind of like Kaysen said, like you could have very different types of stories in the same genre that would call for more of an emphasis on one thing or another. I think maybe the Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter example you brought up might be a good example of that, where the real heavy emphasis on setting and on world building and that sort of thing is sort of like what makes the high fantasy genre what it is. What Tolkien sort of like pioneered that in a lot of ways. Yeah. But like in Harry Potter, like it's just a different emphasis, and because it's telling a different kind of story, it's not really the same thing at all. So despite the fact that they're technically in the same genre, I think that it really depends on what the passion of the storyteller is and who are they talking to, right? In Harry Potter, I mean, she was, at least at the beginning, mostly talking to children in a similar way to that maybe Tolkien was in The Hobbit, right?
Oh,
and
sure,
you see the switch in style, writing style, that happens when he moves into Lord of the Rings. He was trying to bring fairy tales to an adult audience. He wanted that to be something that's not just for kids anymore. And in some ways, Harry Potter sort of it changed who it was speaking to as kids
gradually
grew up.
Exactly, which was the
and
genius of Roman in that sense.
So it's not so much about genre and more about who is the story made for, and what do you personally prioritize? What do you find most interesting of those four elements? Which of the four elements, if done exceptionally well, can make the otherwise average story feel memorable? Definitely characters for me. You can have, at the same time, I think setting, like you said with Tolkien's universe, just blows me away. And so, again, it could be any one of them. But
see,
for me,
if done exceptionally, any of them. I could give you examples of all of them.
Yeah, exactly. But character, I would say first. I want to become attached to people and see how people deal with the problems that they go through. And then which one dragged down the experience? Same answer, just inverse that. And then finally, can it be used as a way to determine if someone would prefer Western RPGs or Japanese RPGs? Maybe to some degree, but then again, you always have spectrums within those even two subgenres of RPGs, if you want to call them genres. But Western RPGs typically have stayed a little more true to their tabletop role-playing roots. Again, on a spectrum, some of them more than others. And so it's about you taking on the role of somebody. So they can't exactly like go into depth about this character's backstory. Usually it's you create it. When you come with a sheet to your D&D session, you write all that out yourself and you come up with it. And that's the fun of it, right? Is the role-playing. And so in Japanese RPGs, early on, they started kind of moving away from that a little bit, and, and had a lot more focus on telling an established story with established characters. And yeah, like if you're more interested in setting, then I think the general landscape of Western RPGs, where that's more of a focus, could probably be more appealing to you. Whereas if character and themes and that sort of stuff is higher in priority for you, generally, again, across a wide landscape and a huge spectrum of games, is usually a stronger focus in Japanese RPGs. One thing, I was watching a video from Game Dave a couple months back. If you guys have not watched his channel before, he's great. Subscribe to his channel, he's awesome. But he was talking about... Like and subscribe. He was talking about, I think it's in his Suikoden review, and he was talking about how there was an element of role-playing even in those Japanese RPGs back in the day. This is probably very true of like the Dragon Quest series too, where they had silent protagonists for a long time.
Yeah.
And they let you name the character, right? So that was kind of their way, even though it had an established look, like a design, unlike a lot of character creation that you would get in lots of Western-style RPGs, they still let you name the character, and they still tried to kind of have you funnel yourself into that character and whatnot. So it's definitely there in a lot of Japanese games, but I think especially when voice acting became something that was expected, they sort of just tried to move away from that a little bit, at least in some of the more traditional franchises, right? So, I don't know. Yeah, I guess you could say that your preferences will determine whether you like one or the other a little more. But again, each individual game can be so different, and you have games like Dark Souls that come from Japan, right? So
I know,
which people forget that.
Yeah, that's like the atypical Western quote unquote RPG, right? But it comes from Japan. So, anyways, that's my answer to that.
Okay, one more thing.
Go for
Since
it.
you guys both pick characters, I have one last defensive theme, being the number one.
Okay.
You're wrong. No, I'm sorry.
No, you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. So this is something I just failed to mention, but that I had thought about before we talked. When you talk about concepts of a good story, like characters and plot and setting are super important. But I guess the question I was answering may have actually been slightly different from the question that you guys are answering, because I think of a good story essentially in the sense of like a life-changing story, right?
Sure.
And
sure.
The way that I kind of approach this would be the impact of a story is what determines whether it's good or not necessarily some of the more technical aspects, right? Yeah. And so, Mike, when you mentioned like the characters and the plot and the setting, that's the what of the story, but theme is the why. And when it comes to changing your life, when it comes to a story impacting you to the extent that you would now think differently about the world, you now feel like a better person. When I look at those four, like a character you really identified with can be seen as like an archetypal hero, somebody that you can aspire to, right? But the theme of a story is, in my opinion, essentially what kind of really motivates you to change your life and to look at things differently and to expand your horizons and maybe do something that you wouldn't have otherwise done. It's my last defensive theme.
Well,
you guys
no,
can make of it what you will.
I don't think you need to defend it for me. I mean, I know.
I'm just joking the whole time. I'm going to attack characters.
No, I knew it. I almost entirely agree with you, and I think that like theme, the moral of a story is more or less like the equivalent of the thesis of like an academic essay. Like, what's the point? You establish that point early on, and you say like, this is the question we're exploring here. Here's all of my evidence that leads to my like summarization and my point that I'm trying to make, and it can help you to not meander in your storytelling too, where you're showing stuff that's completely irrelevant and just feels like it's just rambling, right? So the thesis helps you stay on target in an essay, and I think theme in the same way helps you stay on target in your story. The only reason I put characters above theme is because a lot of times good storytellers they create themes on accident through exploring.
That is absolutely true.
Through exploring characters, through exploring like what it is that they go through. Why do people act this way? The psychology of it. And often they'll kind of stumble into, and you'll have critics raving about like, the theme of the story is just so well executed, and they're kind of like, yeah, that's exactly what I meant all along. and it it wasn't even in their mind, because it's so interpretive. Theme is. So that's the only reason. But I do agree with you that it should be, and it is, in my opinion, like it should be way up there and should help you in structuring. You should have a theme in mind when writing. And if you don't, I think you run the risk of lots of rewrites and lots of cuts that you might not have had to make otherwise.
Sure.
Okay. Anything else to add to that?
Good way to sum it up. Do you want to defend a character one last time? No, I'm just kidding. Let's move on to the real topic that this whole podcast should be titled and should have been about to begin with.
There we go.
Okay.
Lorerunner, I'm going to accuse you of something.
It's okay. I accept it. I'm ready.
I have heard from you that you don't like Yasunori Mitsuda. How do you respond to that accusation?
It is true, because he's the worst composer. No, that's not true. I'm going to say something that has gotten me hate for most of my life. I don't like the Beatles. Now, hear me out here for a second. Hear me out for a second, because I'm going somewhere with this. I don't like the Beatles music, and one of the things I learned as a kid, really, and just kind of became more and more apparent as I grew older, was how much variance there was in preference when it came to music. And I know that sounds like such a dumb thing to say, but in my experience, there are only two things that are that varied when it comes to human preference: music and food. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other things that you can the band of variety shrinks down significantly. But there's no accounting for what kind of music that someone might enjoy. However, that being stated, anybody who knows me knows that I don't actually like just saying, I don't like this. So what I did last night, after Mike got a hold of me and mentioned the questions you were doing, is I actually got a hold of a friend of mine who is a pianist and a music composer who lives out in New Jersey. I'm not going to say her name on public for obvious reasons. And she and I talked for a bit, because I was trying to come up with something more concrete, because as much as I have studied music theory, I'm awful with the vocabulary. So I'm not going to go into a full diatribe, don't worry. However, one of the things that Mitsuda's musical style tends to lend itself towards is I should use her words here, what she calls the staircase approach. He likes to layer something and then layer something else on top of it, and then layer something else on top of that, and usually this just keeps going 5 or 6 layers in, and then he'll bring it back down to the initial layer. And it leads to I don't want to use negative words here, because I don't want to actually insult him. That's not the point. I just don't like him. He's not bad. I just don't like him. But it does lead to sort of a
pattern or repetition, maybe.
Yeah. It leads to a sort of, I don't want to say meandering, but it's more along the lines of, it doesn't have any conclusive or decisive endpoints or beginning points. It just kind of keeps going. And then it kind of keeps going, and then it kind of keeps going. Xenogears is a phenomenal example of this, if you've listened to his music that he did for Xenogears. The second thing I want to mention is his usage of counterpoint with his harmony and melody is just all over the place. He tends to approach things more from she calls it an anti-classical. I don't know if that's the appropriate term or not, but an anti-classical approach, where he doesn't actually try to construct what is effectively 2 songs and layer them mathematically on top of each other. Instead, he tries to construct one song, and then he adds little bits here and there to add to the song, which to my ear personally just sounds a little bit discordant, because I will use an example that's going to get me some hate. Shala's theme in Chrono Trigger is an excellent example of Mitsuda's musical style, because there's just kind of this sort of there's the bass drum beat that goes through basically the entire song, and then there's the oboe, I want to say, that kind of picks up. It's some kind of wind instrument, and the oboe just kind of is the main tune, but doesn't really do much. And any additional additives to that are just, there's this occasional little musical accoutrement that just happens at like the third part and the 6th part and then the 9th part, and then it loops. And so it leads to this song that I don't actually care for that much. I know you're going to hate me. I get it.
No, this is a well thought response. It's very interesting.
I put some work into this one. I don't like to just say I don't like this. I like to give reasoning. I like to show my work, because speaking of which, that leads to my next point. This is a direct quote, so this is going to sound weird. His melodic development and harmonic structuring are very specific. Now, I don't know what those words mean, but well, no, I do. I'm kidding. I do actually know what those words mean. It's just I don't know how to describe it. His melodic development is all about how his melodies move through the melody. This kind of goes to the staircase thing, but I'm gonna go back to Shala's theme because that's a great example of this. In my opinion, Shala's theme is probably the Mitsuda song. You can learn so much about his musical style just from that one song. If you want to give a thanks to that person and interrupt me, that's okay.
Oh, Harper Derp, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate your support. Says your stream still rocks. Thank you. Appreciate you supporting the channel.
Mm-hmm. Isla's theme, as Dude McGuy says, is another excellent example of this. But I like Shala's theme because I got it memorized. The way the music, the way the main melody, kind of, it has no. Oh God, how do I phrase this? It doesn't use what I would consider typical melodic development. It doesn't use major quarter keys. It doesn't use minor quarter keys. It just does whatever it chooses to. Like, he just kind of does his thing and makes it go. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that when I listen to his music, it feels almost uncomfortable because I almost can't predict where it's going. And I know that sounds strange, but there's no proper development of it. I hate to keep going back to that word. And his harmonic structuring is usually done not in direct cooperation with his melodic development. This is
okay.
Go ahead.
So Yasunori Mitsuda writes music the way a rock musician writes music.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. We were actually talking about this last night. We were actually talking about this because he Nobuo Uematsu, who I've actually learned music theory by listening to his music, as I've talked about in my stream, and analyzing his songs. He has an extremely classical orchestral approach to his musical style. I mean, he can do other stuff. He's got a good range, but his main song style, when you think of Uematsu, you're generally thinking of that sort of main focus between the melody and the harmony and their counterpoint, and the way they just bounce back and forth between each other, leading themselves to a significant conclusion, and then usually drop off, and then it continues, right? That pattern applies to so much of his music. But Mitsuda's far more. Okay, slight exaggeration.
You know what's funny? You should hear. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but Nobuo Uematsu talks about. I think it's in the special features for Advent Children. He talks about how he wrote the soundtrack for Advent Children. How it was really difficult for him because they wanted that rock theme in the song, because Final Fantasy VII kind of had some MIDI guitar. You couldn't really tell it was a guitar, but I guess it was. And then when Advent Children comes around, he's like, hey, we got to do something with this guitar. We've got to really make it come through. And especially with Sephiroth's theme, right?
Oh, yeah.
At the end. And that's actually a really cool song. But the way he wrote it, he was questioning whether he should write for rock first or write the classical part first. He didn't know how to approach it, and so he had a weird like mix of the rock with classical, which has been done before, but the way he was approaching it was like he takes it in sections, right? He's got his orchestral, the way it was originally written, and then he injects rock into certain parts. But that's what he's referring to when he talks about writing for rock versus writing for classical, an orchestra, I guess, is the way that you layer the music on top of it. Anyways, it's kind of funny. It's a really interesting thing.
It's worth noting, by the way, when I say the word. Yeah, you should totally watch it. What he's referring, it's a great interview. It is worth noting, just for the sake of clarity of communication. I don't mean classical. That's actually not what I mean.
Yeah, some people in the comments are like, Lorerunner hates Mozart.
No, I don't actually hate Mozart, although I'm not actually a fan of classical. But no, I don't don't have proper terminology is the problem I have when discussing music. Also, I noticed there's some guy behind me here. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what's going on with this.
Don't worry about it.
It's only the best composer in the history of video games. Watching over your shoulder as you... Anyways.
Anyways, that's all I've got. I have terrible musical taste.
No, that's actually a really solid and well thought through response, and I appreciate you putting the time into explaining that as well as you did. It's really interesting. There's kind of things you guys both said that I wanted to touch on. I don't know if I'll remember to do it, but you're talking about the technical side of his writing style, his approach to writing, how it is predictable, which it is, and I think even he would agree with what you're saying, because I've read many interviews with him where he talks about how he would literally go for days and days without sleep, an hour here or there in the office, because he felt he was trying to not because he was just that passionate. He literally says this, but because he felt like he was lacking the skill he needed, and was trying to make up for it by just absolutely giving every last ounce of effort he had, and just pouring everything into it, because he saw perceived shortcomings in himself and felt those insecurities about his mastery, I guess, of the technical side of writing music. And he says that as time has gone by, he goes back and he listens to some of those original songs from Chrono Trigger and from Xenogears, and he feels embarrassed by them, and he feels like he's matured so much since that time.
So does Uematsu, by the way.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah. He's embarrassed by the arpeggio.
Now, here, and this is going to seem, I don't know, maybe a little bit lame, but I just find it interesting in my own sort of way of looking at music, because I get so technical when I analyze film or game design or storytelling or writing, and I get really detailed about the technical side of it, and this is why they did this, and this is why this doesn't work, or maybe does work, and this is how it leads to here, and really diving deep. And with music, for whatever reason, I've never been that way. It's been the complete opposite. Music for me is almost entirely an emotional experience, an emotional response. I feel music. I don't analyze it. Yeah, exactly. Which is funny because my mother tried to teach me piano. She gave me piano lessons for years when I was growing up, and I had no interest in learning the technicalities of reading music and music theory. But I would always leave from my piano lesson and I would go absorb all kinds of different music, and I would feel all these powerful emotions, and it would inspire me, and I would feel like I want to go out and do really creative things, and music drives all of that inspiration for me. Anytime I'm lacking inspiration ever, what I first do is I turn to a composer I like or something like that, and I feel the feelings I need to then transplant that into whatever I'm working on. When I'm editing my videos, actually, the very first thing I do after I've recorded my script is I layer the music first. I don't even touch visuals. I don't write, I'm going to show this here or there. I don't think at all about the visuals of it at all. The first thing I do is I feel how the music is going to transition and add emotional content or value into what I'm saying. And so there's, I guess that way of looking at music, I think, informs the reason why Mitsuda, I think, jumps out to me as a composer, because I think I would agree with you that on the technical side, he's not one of the better composers out there. I would say for Uematsu, to some degree, that's true as well. While still being a little better. He talks about being self-taught, about being inspired by Elton John and prog rock music, and that's what got him into it, and that's why he wanted to learn. So similar sort of approach, into the way of writing music that is not a classically trained approach, right? The big contrast to that would be someone like Yoko Shimomura, who is very much classically trained, and it's so apparent, and you can hear the difference in her compositions to some of those really simple, just layer to the fullness of your your piece and then layer back down again.
Yeah.
And I know that at least a part of that too was driven by loops. They needed to create loops in the music, right? So it's like, we're going to build up to this, but we got to go all the way back down because then we got to start the song over again after 2 minutes, and it's got to loop into itself.
That's a unique video game.
So
problem.
I think that accounts at least somewhat for why we heard a lot of that sort of structure in old video games. But anyways, I got way sidetracked on that. The reason why the reason why Mitsuda, I think, really jumps out to me is because I can feel his passion in the melodies. I can really, really feel his desperation to, because he gave an ultimatum to Sakaguchi specifically.
Sakaguchi, right.
He went all the way up to his office, like, if you don't let me write music, I'm going to quit. And so they gave him the job, and then he finds himself in a place where he doesn't feel like he can actually do it. And he's all insecure about it. He's like, crap. And it all comes crashing down on him. And in the middle of development on Chrono Trigger, he lost an entire hard drive with like 50 completed tracks or something like that, and had to like start over from scratch. And it just the pressure building and just, but I can feel all of those emotions in the individual tracks of Chrono Trigger that he is responsible for. The Chrono Trigger theme itself is one that really speaks to me. As being this explosion of just like excitement and energy, like I'm finally getting my chance. And come to find out, it's the first song he wrote for Chrono Trigger after being given the job. It's like, yes, I can do it. And just jumps in, and all that excitement just bursts out of the gate for the Chrono Trigger main theme. And then my favorite song or my favorite track is To Faraway Times, which plays during the credits. And the retrospective, introspective feelings, reminiscing on the difficulties, the good times, like all of that really rings to me emotionally through that composition. And so I think that for whatever reason, like maybe I haven't met the guy, I can't say, but I think that he probably thinks about music in a similar way to me. And so for that reason, it's all about the emotion and the emotive nature of it, and not so much about the technicalities. And that's both a weakness, I think, and a strength in his writing. So but I absolutely understand where you're coming from now. And the reason I want to say this before I close it off is the reason I wanted to bring this up. This was a question that I asked, nobody from Patreon or anything like that, because I heard you say something about him kind of in passing on one of your streams. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because if he's not my favorite, he's, up there for video game composers. And I just wanted to understand why. And I think you did a really good job of explaining that. It like makes complete sense to me, and I actually agree with you on everything you said. So,
well, okay, then I succeeded. It was worth the effort.
So now I will restore your background. You're no longer tormented by
thank goodness
the ghost of Mitsuda.
Lorerunner, you missed out. You were supposed to say he's right behind me, isn't he?
I didn't even think about that.
You missed it.
I'm sorry.
Would have been perfect.
I have no comedic timing. I can't be funny. I'm sorry.
I'm terrible with that too. I always think of funny jokes like 7 hours later. It's like, dude, that would have been so funny. I should have said that.
Why didn't I
that would
say
have been great.
They call that a jerk store moment.
I know.
In relation to Seinfeld, when George Costanza comes up with the jerk store comeback like a week later, and he's like,
Anyways, let's move on to our next topic. This one comes from Chocolate Rob, a big supporter of both channels, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So Rob asks, Lore, you've spoken of characters you hate versus characters you want off the screen. Mm-hmm. Where do characters you want to see get what's coming to them fit into that? I may hate a person and want them gone, but also want to see them lose. Or a character may have a physical quirk that makes me wish they weren't on screen, runny nose with accompanying noises, that I just, it reminds me of you remember the kid from Wind Waker in the first town who's always like that. That kid, get away from me. Anyways.
Here's the Kleenex, God.
Running nose or accompanying noises that I just don't want to see. In your rumination of DS9 episode Paradise, you talked about how you really hated the episode, and it seemed to be that you hated the villain. I hated the no-tech cult leader villain as a person, but I liked the episode for them standing up to and defeating her. Was it the fact that her ideal was not defeated hard enough for her, or for you maybe? If such a person is not appropriately defeated, does that make the episode a bad one? Or is it that writers maybe imply that such a person is not completely wrong?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at what Chocolate Rob's saying in chat there.
I know, I had read that.
What do you say? Hold on.
Sorry,
Rob.
Sorry.
Question, though.
So really quick, just a super quick definition for those who don't know, the difference is some characters you hate, but you enjoy seeing them on camera. You know, you enjoy reading about them, you enjoy watching them, you enjoy playing about them. Some characters you hate, and you just want them off your screen. You don't want to interact with them. You don't want to see them. For whatever reason, you want them gone, and you want them to stop being a part of the fiction you're enjoying. That's the difference between the two, and that I just wanted to define that really quickly. Now,
before you jump into this, I recently watched all the way through DS9. Remind me of this episode. What is the premise?
My God, I hate this episode. Okay, so Cisco and O'Brien get stuck on this planet, and they're like, oh my God, all our tech isn't working, but there's this cult leader. They don't know she's a cult leader at first, but she's this cult leader, and I did a little more of an in-depth analysis in my rumination on this, but basically everything she does is trying to belittle and break down other people around her so they are...
I remember this episode. Yeah, I remember this episode.
There's a bit where they throw her, they throw Cisco into a box, and it's just this big plastic crate out in the sun. And for those who don't know how horrible that is, well, think about it for a second. But... It's and what she's trying to demand of him is that he change into the clothes that she insists that he wear. In other words, to tacitly, at least passively, accept her authority, and it's the whole breaking it down. Now, towards the end of the episode, spoilers. Towards the end of the episode, they find out what's going on, and they're like, "Aha! We have resolved this. You know, we have proven that you are keeping us here against our will." And basically, so what basically happened is she was on a group of colonists. On a ship with a group of colonists. She deliberately sabotaged the ship so it would crash here, and then she took over. Okay.
And they were trying to get away from the technology.
Yeah. They were trying to go for a little more simpler form of a life. And so she establishes this cult, and I'm just going to call it what it is because it's a cult. And at the end of the episode, they oust her, and then so Cisco and O'Brien get out. But everyone else is like, well, no, there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, this is our home. And,
that was strange, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with what she did. And it's just, what? And the camera even lingers on the children. This bothered me. It lingers on the children who have no say in this matter.
Yeah.
None of them have the choice to leave. And all of the adults do not choose to leave. And so they're all just kind of cool with it. And so, in other words, to answer one of Chocolate Rob's last questions there, why did she not get her comeuppance? She didn't get her comeuppance at all. That's the problem.
I
she got away with it. Yep. She won, and that bugs the crap out of me. But I'm trying to remember what the rest of the question was now. Sorry, you got me off.
Let's see. Where do characters who you want to see get what's coming to them fit into this idea of characters?
Right. Okay, so. The problem for me personally, I can only speak from my own personal experience, but the problem is if you have someone who is a get off character, kind of a get off screen kind of a character, then when I'm looking at that character, I don't want to see them get their comeuppance. I want to see them go away. I don't actually because the point is for me, both emotionally and intellectually. God, I'm stumbling on my words. I'm really tired. Forgive me. It's kind of late for me. For both intellectually and emotionally, I am not invested in that character because I hate them. I don't enjoy them, hate them. I hate them, hate them. It's why I keep this distinction. And so it's like, okay, I'm looking at this character and they get their comeuppance, to which my reaction is about time. It's not, yeah, or that's what you get, or anything like that. It's just, it's about time. And then they get off my screen. And now I have what I want. So in other words, even if a character gets proper comeuppance, even if there is a proper karmatic retribution or conclusion of their character arc, it doesn't matter to me personally because they were never a character that I gave a damn about. I hope that answers you, Chocolate Rob. Now, real quick, Chocolate Rob asks one other thing in chat real quick. He says, if the bad guy wins, is it a bad episode? Absolutely not. I have never been opposed to the villain winning or the bad guy losing. I like Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Deep Space Nine has a lot of that going on.
I like Babylon 5 for that matter.
Yeah.
Babylon 5 is another excellent example. It's not the fact that the villain won. That's not what bothers me. It's everything in combination that bothers me.
Yeah, it's more like they wanted to put some sort of moral gray into like what she did, even though it's so clearly black and white wrong. Yeah. Like there's not really any way you can spin that to be like, no, this was okay in context.
I really believed that this was the bet. No, she didn't. No, I actually brought that question up in that rumination. I was like, do you guys think she actually believed her own rhetoric? Because I don't. But yeah. I could understand that she does believe her rhetoric. But even if she does, that's number two to I'm in charge. It's sure. The power plays she does are so blatant and obvious. It's practically out of the textbook.
It's like it's the difference between, say, she had won and Sisko and O'Brien leave, and it's like really dire. It's like, oh man, like you don't feel good about it. Yeah. And you see the children, and they're not hopeful about the future. Or you don't see other people be like, yeah, this is fine.
This is cool.
They're like, oh man, like we're gonna suffer because of this, and you have to leave the situation unresolved. Like that can be a very like fine ending for something like that. But to try and play it off like, no, these people are cool with the fact they were lied to. They're cool with the fact that she sabotaged their mission. These kids have no say, like you were saying, in their future. They're going to have to be left here. And everyone's okay with this. And it's actually, if you look at it a certain way, it's not bad. That's the part that I took issue with. And it seems you did too.
Yeah. Just badly constructed.
Yeah. Yep. I remember that.
That's Obi-Wan Kenobi's. I was telling the truth from a certain point.
Certain point
of view. Kenobi. Smack. There we go. Jedi smack.
Point of view.
Yeah, it's called the lying point of view. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, the right point where you where it's not true, but hey.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Rob. Good question. Let's move on to the final topic for today. This one comes from J.R. Shire. How do you understand concepts like canon and continuity? Yes. What are they? Are the terms synonymous or different, and how do they relate to each other? That's the bulk of the question. He has some context here. I'll kind of skip around it. It's related to discussions on what is canon and continuity in video games, television, movies. People debate about the Zelda timeline and what's not canon, even though we have like Hyrule Historia and stuff like that. Tolkien's often
throws it out the window.
I know. And then Tolkien, he says he's back and forth in his broader legendarium about what was and was not canon in his own work. Yeah. Some people criticize Star Trek Discovery because the visual style doesn't match up with TOS era. A lot of people have issues with that, of course. You know, how do you modernize without it betraying like the entire like look and feel of the original? For my own 2 cents, canon and continuity are two different things. Canon is a body of work and its component text which are considered authoritative to that corpus or world, whereas continuity is about the structure of individual texts and how consistent it is from one part to another. Okay. I'll just say off the bat, I agree with his definition, but I want Laura to take the question first. Okay,
so let me talk for 7 hours. All joking aside, I have talked so much about continuity in my career as a YouTuber and a streamer, but also in my life as a geek. So I remember the first continuity discussion I ever had. It was with my mother. I was about 5 or 6, and we were talking about Star Trek. And I'm not saying this to show off. I'm just saying this is how much continuity has formed a part of my digestion of fiction. It's always been a hugely important thing to me. And I'm speaking about continuity more, and I swear I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me. So for me, the easiest way to explain, let's go ahead and start with something. Continuity is not mandatory. It isn't. I personally prefer continuity, and I do think continuity adds to a work, absolutely. I think that proper continuity is also something. Can we just assume I'm always saying the words proper continuity, and I don't have to keep repeating that?
All right, from now on, proper continuity is what you
add proper. So continuity, there we go. You put it in there. Continuity is something that adds to investment in a work, because what continuity does almost automatically is makes things matter. If let me use a direct example. Let's say there's an episode of Star Trek Voyager in which the Doctor has an incredibly, horrifically, nightmarishly tragic event to happen to him that's going to change his character forever, and it's never mentioned again. That is the exact opposite of continuity. That is the entire problem, is that those events, however well they were presented, however fun, however much they hit the sixth point of story, they don't matter because they never mattered again. Now, that being said, if I might go one additional step here, I know there's official terms for these. I actually looked these up just last night because I was doing research for this stream. And I found that the official terms suck. So I'm going to use my own terms. Is that cool?
Mm-hmm.
So this is string continuity, right? Now, string continuity is easy to describe. Season 3 of Enterprise, Battlestar Galactica, the remake, Babylon 5 for a lot of its run. String continuity is an episode ends, and then the next episode begins, and it is basically happening right after.
Like a seasonal arc, right?
Exactly. This is one contiguous story across multiple fictions. Kingdom Hearts is actually probably another good example of string continuity. The events go directly into it. Now, I do like string continuity, but a lot of people seem to presume that that's what continuity means, and that's not true. I'm going to go ahead and use my second form of continuity, which is far more common and also works very well. And that's the kind that Star Trek The Next Generation employed excessively. That's setting continuity. So setting continuity is when something will happen and it will matter in little ways. It'll be referenced, or it'll have some impact on the background, or maybe the plot will be kickstarted by that.
Even across shows, right? Like into DS9 and into Voyager.
Exactly, yeah. They kept doing that. They actually did a fairly large amount of setting continuity in that particular era of Star Trek's development. And that led to a lot more investment because, just to use really, really tiny examples, after Picard got that flute, I'm going to say this without spoiling, after Picard got that flute, you would see that flute in his room. You would see him playing on it and practicing it every now and again. And nobody has to come out and say, is that the flute you got during episode 332? But the fact that it was there adds a little bit of additional realism and believability to the viewer because we know where he got that from. And we now look at that and say, aha, and that just adds more depth to it, adds more immersion, and adds more significance. Now, all of this is leading to the word canon, because the actual question was about the difference between continuity and canon. Now that we've defined continuity, let's define canon. Canon is what the owners of a work, and not the writers, but the owners of a work dictate is continuity, or should be considered continuity at any given point in time. It is, by definition, an extremely malleable thing, and has led to issues for years in every long-time franchise that exists. I've been talking about Star Trek. Here's another one for you. Doctor Who has so many issues with canon over the years. Yeah. Star Wars, let's use that one. Ignoring the Disney torpedo thing, some of you may remember there was actually a division at Lucasfilm for a long time that kept track of the layers of canon. And they actually had multiple divisions of canon. It was like, okay, you want to make this story, but you don't want it to be totally coherent with everything else. So you only have to consider the big stuff. You only have to consider the stuff that basically in the original trilogies as canon, as continuity. But for me, canon is all about the rules. This is what you're allowed to do. This is what you're not allowed to do. And because that is so all over the place and changes wildly because of who's in charge at a given point in time, I don't think canon is something that should really be considered significant. And I know that's kind of a weird statement to say, but I've always held the opinion, and I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, that the person who should actually define what continuity matters is you, the viewer or the player. That's always been my opinion.
Canon.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is headcanon. Because, and I'm going to go ahead and use Star Wars on this. I segued on purpose because we all cherry picked the EU. We all did it, right? Mm-hmm. There were always things in the EU we looked at like, I'm never going to think about that again. That's gone. The holiday special, nope. Crystal Star, gone. We all did that. Right. And so for me, that is the canon that actually matters, the head canon. And I mentioned that because, and again, I expect to get some flack for this, because a lot of people use the term head canon as an insult. As basically, oh, well, that's just your head canon. Oh, go ahead and let me hear your head canon theory or whatever.
Yeah.
But defining that headcanon, it's basically I'm in favor of it for reasons already said. And if you're having a discussion with someone, as long as you define your headcanon, we acknowledge this, this, and this, then you can have a reasonable discussion based on what you acknowledge as having continuity. And now I need to take a drink.
That's a great answer. I really like the way you kind of again split what you call string continuity with setting continuity, and the importance of setting continuity. I agree with that a lot. Like that's more important. Because you do your Star Trek ruminations, by the way, anybody who's into Star Trek, go and watch Lorerunner's channel, because he does these just episode by episode deep dives and breakdowns of each individual episode. Right now he's simultaneously doing The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and he already has the entire series of Voyager that he did for years on his channel. That's actually one of the ways I started watching. Actually, was through the Star Trek ruminations. But anyways, because you were doing your ruminations on TNG and DS9, I was going to be going through them with you, and you do them once a week. So it was like a Sunday thing. You sit down and watch one episode of each. But I couldn't do it because I just too eager to keep going, especially for TNG, which is really bad the first two seasons. And I had to get out of here and go into the good stuff. But it is amazing the setting continuity that the three of those shows kind of have. And the way that you'll bring, what's his name? Barclay came back into Voyager there towards the end, and you saw his story way back in TNG, and you saw how he kind of developed as a character, and they did a really good job with reoccurring characters, I feel, during that era of Star Trek, and bringing them back, and you kind of get an arc for members of the crew who aren't like the bridge crew, like the senior staff or whatever you call it. What do they call them? Senior officers. The main guys that are in all the photos
for the show.
For
those who play STO, they're the boss.
They handled a lot of their sort of secondary reoccurring characters really well, and Barclay was one of my favorites. But to see him sort of return in Voyager, and he's come a long way, but he's still struggling. I really liked that about all three of the shows that have their ups and downs for sure. I mean, there's some really, really bad Star Trek, and there's some amazing Star Trek, but. No, it's a really good breakdown. And on the subject of canon, though, I ultimately agree with the conclusion. What actually matters, because we're each individuals here, and our enjoyment of something is what actually matters to us. Your head canon is really all that should matter. And I think people often get too carried away with trying to establish, well, what is the real answer? And then you get into author intention and everything else, and whether that really matters, or, a lot of people subscribe to the theory that the author's dead, and as soon as the author puts it out there, it's no longer his, and, or hers. So, anyways, I don't know. I don't get too wrapped up in what other people consider canon. I'm a huge Tolkien nut. And I purposefully stay away from forums or people discussing things of this nature about what's canon and what's not. And because I love Christopher Tolkien's prose and his storytelling ability far more than J.R.R. Tolkien's. But so many people dismiss the works he's publishing now
because it's not canon.
Because it's not canon, right?
Of course.
It's not really canon. So, for me, it's well, I don't care, because it feels consistent. It feels continuous. Continuous? Is that a word? Continuous. It feels continuous with, for me, everything the spirit of everything that his father wrote and created. And I just enjoy it so much more. I enjoy the style of his writing and his prose so much more. And I think that the stories have more depth because of it. And so, it doesn't matter if anyone in the world, even the Tolkien estate, comes out and says Christopher Tolkien's publications are not canon. I'm going to consider that part of the canon in my own head, because I think that it is so consistent, and it just works so well, and it really fleshes out stories that he never had a chance. J.R.R. Tolkien never had a chance to really finish himself. So. Right. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at on that. But
Tolkien's a great example of that too. I was going to save that because I figured you wanted to talk about that, because I don't know how much you've done, or any of the viewers have done a dive on what is considered Tolkien canon, but I was going to say there are arguments about what of his own works count as canon.
Yep.
Those arguments go layers in. It's
and not
insane.
Least because he revised his own work years later.
Yeah,
several times,
which already complicates canon, right?
I know. I think the whole idea of canon in general in this kind of sense, because you look at the word canon, and I see a big like religious background to the word in general, like what is canon and what isn't canon. You see that term used in Judaism and in Christianity, of course, with which books are canonical within like the Old Testament or the New Testament. And there's always been debate about that, because the idea is that the work is essentially perfect, right? And so when you look at the authors here, it's almost like a form of celebrity worship. It's almost like a form of a deification of the people who wrote this work that you like, because you're assuming that for every question they had the answer. You're assuming that the author is in this set of mind where the entire world laid bare in front of them, they were able to create and manipulate, and everything is seamless and works perfectly. That is never the case. Humans are 100% incapable of doing that. Humans suck. We try to make stories, but we really aren't that good at it, which is why it's so easy to go to a movie and be like, the director didn't know what he was doing. They paid him $5 million to make this movie. But now, generally speaking, I would say that the deification of a human is maybe some.
Oh no, we're losing you. Hold on.
Uh-oh.
Hold on. We're losing you, Kason. Your internet is going down. It is crashing and burning. You realize it now, though. Okay, you're back. You're good.
Let me know. Is it back?
It's back.
Jeez, guys, I'm sorry about that. Anyways, point being, deification of a person, of a human, is something we should, generally speaking, try to avoid, because it will lead to disappointment every single time.
No. Nomura does everything on purpose.
All of it. Nomura is a great example, but let's not get into that right now. I want to stick with Tolkien, because at least when you're talking about Star Wars with George Lucas, it was such a collaborative effort. He didn't even write the scripts for the movies. Well, for the 5th and 6th, and he did write some of them. Anyways, those often are considered the lesser good of it. But regardless, he didn't come up with everything necessarily. It wasn't all in his mind. He kind of was like, oh, that's cool. And he incorporated things around him that other people came up with because he thought they were cool. And so even when you look at, well, what does George Lucas think? Well, even George Lucas doesn't know his own canon as well as some people. So when it's a collaborative effort, when you've got hundreds of people working on a film and you're saying everything in that film is 100% canonical, then if one of them ever comes out and says something different, it kind of messes with the whole thing. Like you have no way of actually knowing what you're seeing is canon and what isn't, because the creator of it doesn't know. And that is what this whole thing boils down to. So all the canon discussions is totally deification of the creator or of the authors, and the assumption that they truly knew everything as they were creating the story. And it's just never the case.
Which is, again, why, just what you personally take from the work is really what's important anyways. It was created and this kind of even boils back to our talk about theme earlier, right? Like the author could have a certain intention with theme, but like the person gets something completely different out of it. And that's still totally valid, because that person's experience, their life experience, leads to their perspective and the way they look at something being different from even the author who created the work. And to that person, it's completely valid. Now, there are some people in the comments or in the chat here, Heon in particular, talking about, when you start sharing your headcanon with others and being quick to dismiss people who introduce problems with continuity and things like that. Yeah, I would say that headcanon shouldn't matter to anyone except the person who is constructing it for themselves, right? Who cares what anyone else thinks, unless you think their take is interesting, right? And to a large extent, I think that channels like ours and like Lorerunners, often we are sort of like talking about things that we took out of it, and obviously people follow us and find our takes interesting, and they'll come, you'll come in with your own perspectives, and I learn from that all the time. I change my opinions on many games I've reviewed in the past because of the things that you guys have told me that I thought were extremely interesting, and so like the opinions of others can really help in maximizing your enjoyment of something. And understanding it better and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, if someone's coming out of left field with like like this and this, it's like, yeah, who cares? Don't worry about that guy. Worry about your own personal headcanon.
Yeah, it's art. Art is a subjective experience. And there's really no way around that. Two people can see the same work of art and have different reactions. And literature is art, and that's just how it is.
Well, but video games aren't art, so we're okay on that one. If I could add one quick thing as well, this is going to sound like it's coming from a weird place, but I really love speedrunning. And
nice.
So in speedrunning, you have to define your category. That's extremely important because otherwise you can't compare your times to other people because they're literally doing something different than you, right?
Right.
I mean, that's an extremely base thing, but you'd be surprised how many times I have to explain this to people. It's like, no, okay, I'm doing this exact thing. That's why I'm 20 minutes slower than him because I'm doing stuff he's not. I mentioned that because for me, it's the exact same thing with headcanon. If you want to sit down and have a discussion or have a debate, you need to establish the category. You need to establish the rules. It's like, okay, what are we? Because I've done this for so many years. It's like, all right, so let's talk about this and talk about this and talk about, and someone will say like, this friend of mine, he would say, okay, well, hang on. Well, what about in this one book? And he'd mention something. I'm referencing a specific event here. I'm actually referencing something from Crystal Star. No joke. I was like, this thing happened in Crystal Star. Should that actually consider? And we debate back and forth and be like, all right, let's eject that from our personal headcanon that we are developing for the case of this discussion. And then once that's gone, we've established our rules, and now we can discuss it. This is in response to Ian, this is the only reason I think headcanon would matter to others is for said discussions. Because you have to establish the rules. Otherwise, you're running a different category.
Yeah. Another comment I saw here in the chat, something Heon brought up again. I just want to respond to that. The idea that we can interpret anything however the fetch we want is retarded, in my opinion. It shits all over how language is used and understood every day, and then goes on to say, if you say, I like ice cream, and I insist on interpreting that as anti-Semitism, that would be absurd. So, first of all...
Ian is wrong here.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredibly extreme example, first of all, I would say. And obviously no one's going to disagree with that.
Right.
But
the literal and the abstract.
But art is so often wrapped up in allegory and symbolism and metaphor, and is like the intention is for it to be interpretive in the first place. And I think that
language is not.
To completely dismiss the idea that different people can take something different from a work or see it in a different way or find a different theme that is personalized to them, I think is kind of like the point of art. And so sometimes, and it's a case-by-case basis too. Obviously you're going to have some people who they have a very strong intention and they make it very clear and they're being very literal in their storytelling. And it's obvious that they want you to see it this way. And then, trying to take that and make a completely unrelated interpretation would obviously be... I don't think anyone would disagree that's not the right way to go about it, or that's misguided or whatever. But I think interpretation is still a really, really big part of it. So personal interpretation.
Yeah, it kind of has to be. Like, he does bring up a good point. Not everything is subject to people's interpretations. You have to be grounded at some point. You have to be grounded in something. You have to have something in common with the people around you that you agree on so that you can communicate in the first place. Like, that is a big deal. But when it comes to art, the experiences that different people have, I mean, you can't count that out.
It goes on to clarify, I'm not completely dismissing the idea that there is never a more accurate interpretation of certain art. I'd have to think on that, chew on that a bit. I mean, I see where you're coming from, but I'm not sure I entirely agree with it. But
yeah, I'd have to think about that too.
It is
like, is there an accurate interpretation of art? I don't know. Like, you can maybe be more in line. You can maybe be more in line with what the artist thought, but that doesn't make it accurate. I don't know. That's interesting philosophy, Heon.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll discuss this further. I'm in contact with Heon all the time on Discord.
Yes.
And maybe the topic will arise again in coming podcasts. Maybe we'll have Heon on and he can explain his philosophy.
Have Heon on? Just the fact that rhymes is like, we should absolutely have Heon on.
Anyways, that's it for this week's podcast. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Lorerunner, for taking the time to come on. If you guys are not familiar with Lorerunner's channel, check him out on YouTube.
Bald guy. Don't watch it.
But also check out his Twitch channel too. He does a lot of streaming.
I'll be streaming tomorrow.
There's a large part of what you do is these, you call them, well, the premiere runs are new games, right? But where you run through an entire game and you're analyzing it like bit by bit as you're going through it. You want to kind of explain what you do on Twitch?
Sure. Okay, so I do 3 different things, which are actually the same thing, just in different expressions. That would be in-depth classics, premiere runs, and lore runs. A lore run is when I go through something I know extremely well, and I'm giving you a deep dive analysis of the design of the game, the construction of the game, the construction of the narrative, discussing the out-of-character stuff or in-character stuff, behind the scenes, and basically everything that I can to try and give you as much of a lore dump as I possibly can. I usually do lore runs of actual franchises rather than just a game. For example, earlier this year I did a lore run of The Elder Scrolls, where I went through Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. A premiere run and an in-depth classic are both actually the same thing, just at a different perspective. It's basically the closest I get to reviews. The entire idea is to go through a game and analyze everything as we go. Again, both from a gameplay and from a narrative perspective, trying to decide, is this good game design? Is this bad game design? Why is this being applied this way? What philosophy are doing with this? What's this character doing this? How much does this story point matter to me? How much does this plot point matter to me, et cetera, et cetera? And trying to connect it to any previous works that might exist within the game we're doing premiere runs of. And the in-depth classic is basically the premiere run. It's just for older games. It's an intent to go back through. This is something my viewers and my patrons have been funding, which is awesome. They're great. Where we go back through NES games, SNES games, GBA games, older games, and sit down and try to really analyze how good these games actually are. Basically doing the full run through and giving them all the pluses and minuses as if the game came out now, effectively attempting to remove nostalgia from the equation and weigh it on its own merits. So
it's great stuff.
All right.
Check it
Tune
out.
in, people.
Actually,
oh yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, for those watching afterwards, there will be links to Lorerunner's Twitch and YouTube channels in the description. I don't have them in there at this moment, but as soon as we
Lorerunner.com, it's really simple.
and also go to his website. That is actually a very good point. Go to his website and you can actually keep up with everything that's going on, the schedule, because you actually do what we should be doing, and you create your videos like 3 months ahead of time.
Yeah,
and so you have a huge backlog.
I'm working on January's videos right now for perspective.
Yeah, and so you don't run into the problem like we had this week, where Kason uploaded a video and we ran into copy wrong, and we don't have something else to put in its place. So Lorerunner's a smart guy. He's got it up here. He knows what's up about how to run a show. So go watch his stuff. Go to his website. All 3 of those links will be in the description. And you had something you're going to say, Kason? Yes,
I did. Earlier in the podcast, about 3 minutes ago, I said the words "Heian is wrong." After seeing his clarifications through the comments he's made, I actually think that he's not wrong. But that's something we could maybe tackle in the next podcast. Because if a kid draws a stick figure and says, "This is my dad," and you say, "No, that's the mythical being of, the human self onto paper," and the kid's like, "No, this is my dad." It's like, are you right or wrong in interpreting that? Anyways, we should talk about that next week.
Okay, we're going to get into interpreting art next week.
Woo! All right.
What's the right way? We're going to determine once and for all.
It's going to be determined for all time. We've got this.
All right. Too good. You guys are great. Thank you for following us. If you're listening to this on the audio-only version, you can check us out on YouTube as well, and hopefully Kason's video will be up at some point. You can watch that. Also,
we'll see.
Thank you, Swanwick, for sponsoring this podcast. I'm wearing your glasses. They cut out the blue light, and if you have trouble with eye fatigue because you look at blue screens all day and you get all this blue light and you can't sleep at night, check out the link in the description. Check out the Swannies glasses from a Swanwick. All right, guys. Peace out. Have a great day.